Hello, this is Brian Houle. I am a solutions consultant with Beyond 20, and today I want to speak briefly about the out-of-the-box service catalog in the pre-implementation checklist you've received. The idea here is for you to take this as a model in devising your own service catalog that speaks to and functions for the needs of your business. In ITIL terms, you can think of a service catalog really as a marketing and communication tool with the business that communicates what IT does for the business in terms of delivering value. So what value does IT bring to the business? The service catalog helps you communicate that. Let's talk briefly about what a service is. The ITIL definition, to paraphrase, is an outcome that the business wants to achieve without the associated cost or risk. So really, your service here, this first column C, is an outcome. And it should be phrased in terms that the business can understand. So here we have things like account management, conferencing, presentation, desktop management, email and calendaring. These are all outcomes that IT provides for the business. The category is in column D here is really an aspect of that outcome, or an aspect of the service. So in this case, we've got two here. You probably have more. So under account management, we have network access and Cherwell service, Cherwell self-service. So the idea here is that you have access to the network, access to Cherwell self-service, and these are aspects of account management that you provide for the business. However, if you have an ERP like Microsoft Dynamics, you might add that in here as well. And you might have other things such as VPN, perhaps that have a separate piece to it that you might include here. The subcategory, these are really actions that the customer wants to take or wants you to take on their behalf. So these can actually even be phrased a little better. And you see down here under conferencing and presentation, we have request account. So it's sort of verb noun. I prefer this because I find that if we phrase all of our subcategories, in terms of a verb and a noun, the action nature of it is very clear. And when this is displayed on your self-service portal, it cues the customer that there's an action there to take. So we have things like request account, request webcam, request projector, but in terms of incidents, we have submit incident, or you can even change this if submit incident won't work for your business. You might try report issue. People kind of respond maybe a little bit more readily to that, but request incident, submit incident, request upgrade, anything with a sort of a verb in front of it, I think is a great way to phrase it. Even over here, change password, right? Service request. So let's talk about that next. In column F, we have our type. Now, in ITIL version 3 breaks down your tickets into two types: service requests, which are requests for new service, or requests for information. That also falls under service request, or incidents. And an incident is a loss of or reduction in service, or I should say a loss in or reduction in agreed service levels. So those are, when you actually start working with Cherwell, you'll see that the forms are very similar. In fact, it works off of the same object, but because ITIL distinguishes between the two, Cherwell merely has a flag that indicates whether a ticket is an incident or a service request. Technically, in terms of the Cherwell backend, they're the same thing. But however, ITIL splits them out, and that's why we do it here. But what determines whether it's a service request or an incident is really, as you can see, the classification from the service catalog that is applied to the ticket. So that's how we're going to indicate here. And I wouldn't sweat this too much when you're building this. When in doubt, just pick one, and then, if you have questions, your solutions consultant can kind of help you determine whether it's a service request or an incident. But in most cases, it's going to be pretty self-explanatory. Going back to subcategory real briefly, if you decide to heavily modify this catalog and you want to start from scratch, what I find helpful is if you can't kind of conceive of a subcategory for every category, at the very least you'll have two, and this is a good starting place. So let's talk about that real quick. I'm going to go down here and say I'm creating a new service. I'm just going to call it new service, and I'll have a new category. Now, when I get to the subcategory, if I can't really think of anything, what I can do at the very least is have submit request, and that will be my service request. And I can also have submit incident, and that will be my incident. So at least for every entry here, every category, I will have a request, a service request, and an incident. So as you're layering in new services, which you inevitably will, it's sometimes confusing. You can kind of get to the service and you can kind of get to the category level, but when you get to the subcategory or action to take level, it's not always clear. So I always say, just assume at the outset that you're putting in at least two, submit request and submit incident, and then move on. You can always go back and change later. So going back up to the top where we can see our column headers, we have things like visible and portal. So the question here is this particular classification going to be available to your customers through the self-service portal? If it is, you put true. If it's not, just indicate false. So some of the things that might be visible in the portal would obviously be all the customer-facing things. You may have a few services in here that you don't want portal users in general to be able to access. So then you would put false. So if you have, for instance, some infrastructure services that you provide, maybe some server provisioning that you don't want the average business user to access, then you'd put false. Finally, team and specifics. So for team, this would be the default assignment team that would receive tickets classified for that classification, that service category and subcategory. So for instance, the default team for new accounts might be this default team might be your network security team. You might have an account management team, etc., etc. Desktop management, pretty obvious. Requesting a new computer, that might go to a procurement team. It might go to your desktop support team so that they can approve it before it goes to procurement. They can see if they have it in stock. So here's really where you want to think about your workflow. And these are really who's the default team that would work a ticket of this type. Specifics. Specifics forms are detail forms, and they can provide troubleshooting steps for your first level support, or they can provide fields for first level support to fill in so that when the ticket eventually gets escalated to a tier 2 or tier 3, all the information is there that's needed. So for instance, let's go back to our computer request. So if we have a new computer, the specifics form might contain things such as make and model. Maybe you have options for RAM, the processor, how many monitors, that kind of stuff. Obviously, you don't want to choke up your catalog with that, but the specifics form is a great place to do that. That would be a great example of an order form. And you'll find that in the Cherwell ships with a number of specifics forms that you can use. The printing one, I think, is particularly useful. And it's a good example, too, because what it shows is if I'm going to request a desktop printer, the specifics it's going to display is an order form, right? Collects all the information. However, if I'm submitting a printing incident, it's going to have a whole bunch of troubleshooting steps, like is the printer on? Is there an error code? Is it online? That sort of thing. that the person can fill in, and your solution consultant can review these with you in detail. And as part of your engagement, you'll probably have a number of custom specifics forms that we'll be developing for you. So it's a good time to think about where you might want these to go. And you can just put in some free text here. This will be the the onboarding form or the desktop troubleshooting form, and we'll match it up once we spec that out. And then over here, these columns just show you how many characters exist, or are currently. The service field is 50 characters. The category field is 30 characters. Yeah. So, however, I've never actually seen an implementation where these are all these all meet this spec. So we end up just increasing the size. So just work on your catalog, and if we need to, when we start configuring a system, we'll increase the size of these columns, but that's just there for you. So one more thing I want to do is talk about how it's structured. So it's one thing to look at the catalog in this sort of structure, but what I like to do is I copy and paste this into a blank spreadsheet and then throw it into a pivot table, because that kind of gives you a better example of how this works. So let me pop over to my pivot table here. 1 second. There we are. All right, so what I've done is I've taken that self-same data, it's the same data, and I've thrown it into an Excel pivot table. Because what that allows me to do is it allows me to, let me collapse the entire field. Allows me to look at this in more of like a tree structure, right? So it makes it much easier to kind of conceptualize how this is going to work. So we have our account management, Cherwell self-service, and then we have our subcategory. So this is service, category, and then subcategory. They kind of live nested this way. And this is the structure that works for Cherwell. We don't really recommend going deeper than 3 categories. Otherwise, you take a useful sort of structure and heuristic, and it just kind of becomes overburdensome. Okay, so that's the basic structure. And when we're putting together our service catalog, we're really concerned about the data at this point, and how it's nested like this. Don't concern yourself with presentation. Presentation comes later. So, for instance, like I said, you may want to selectively reveal certain items to certain audiences, and we can do that for you. A lot of the times that's going to depend on your identity management system and how we can determine which, again, we're talking about self-service here, but which customers are whom. So in other words, if we're pulling your customer data from Active Directory, which is common, does Active Directory have attributes that we can key on that will tell us, maybe they're in a given department, or they are even an external customer? Can we tell these things about your customer? If so, we can determine, in Cherwell, what is revealed to them in the presentation layer. So I've been talking about that a bit. Let's take a look at what this actually looks like in the tool. Okay, so here is out of the box, this is demo data. But you'll notice a couple of things. This is the technician view. So this is the desktop client technician view. And we've got, you'll notice that it says service request up here. And that is, again, determined by our subcategory. So if you'll notice that back on the spreadsheet, we had the column for type. This is where it's put to use. So if I change this to submit incident, you'll notice my ticket changes to incident. So it's all driven by the service catalog. So the next thing I'm going to do is change this to the printing service, and we'll look at that specifics column and what that does. So I'm going to change this to printing desktop and request desktop printer. And this is where our specifics form appears. Again, this is the technician view. This is not the customer view. So if I'm on the phone taking tickets, this is what I'm going to see. And so see here, I've got make, model number, price per unit, quantity. This you can use this out of the box. You can customize this. You'll notice this is a printing service request. Now, if I change this to submit incident, everything changes. Now I have a troubleshooting form. So this is useful for first level support to kind of ask the same questions every time, so that by the time this gets escalated, all the bases have been covered. And it may be that, in going through this checklist, the technician is asking the customer, is the power on? Yes. Any loose cables? Yes. Is it online? Oh, it's not online. We'll go ahead and turn it online. That resolves the incident. It never has to go to a second tier technician. So that's sort of the nature of specifics forms, and that's the other kind of piece in there. Now, in this case, if it does need to be escalated, we can make some selections here, maybe put in the error code, and go from there. And you'll notice that some of these are automated. So there is some logic in the background, some expressions that say if the symptom error is 20, then we know the cause is insufficient memory. So lots of automation in the background. Cherwell is very configurable. And part of the issue with Cherwell, though, it's so configurable that you can get a little lost in it. But if you stay focused, again, on outcomes that you need to provide to the business, that can guide you through. So that, in a nutshell, is so we've covered so far the structure of the service catalog, sort of what each piece means, and then we've looked at the technician view. Let's take a quick look at the out-of-the-box self-service view, and you'll see how the service catalog is presented in that context to the client. Okay, here we are looking at an out-of-the-box configuration for the self-service portal. And I've logged in as Henri Bryce. That login, you could use the built-in Cherwell authentication. You can use AD authentication, SAML. Cherwell supports any of these things. Once I'm here, though, this will be configured for you, I'm sure. However, the service catalog is where the customer can come and kind of pick. This really becomes that menu metaphor where they're coming to the IT restaurant and they're looking at the menu, and we have the service level, which is the outcome, or to extend that menu metaphor, this might be appetizers, this might be entrees, desserts. And down here at this level, we're talking about, if this is appetizers, we're talking about soups, and we're talking about I don't know, what is all the starters, like awesome blossoms and poppers and things like that. There's like pepper poppers or whatever. But anyway, this is one way to display the catalog. Cherwell comes with a number of templates to sort of lay out your catalog. And the idea with Cherwell is that you're changing your table of data, and then Cherwell is doing the job of laying it out and presenting it. So these templates are sort of just kind of look at your service catalog and then automatically generate that table of data. And this one is particularly designed so that they can scroll, but they don't have to click a lot. Now, what we're looking at is, I think this is primarily, this is a very, this is most of the service catalog that we looked at in that spreadsheet. However, like I said, you can selectively reveal services to the customer in the portal. By changing that true and false value in the pre-implementation spreadsheet. So I don't need to show all of my services. I can have, maybe 30 services, but only show them 10. Maybe the other 20 are for a technical audience. We don't display it in the self-service portal. So you can kind of go that way any way you want. But the idea here is, let's go to our printing example. It's on the other column. So if I'm looking for printing, there it is. I can go in here and I could submit an incident. And we can, when we click this, we're going to have a form that appears. Now, if we're so inclined, we can show that self-same specifics form that we saw in the technician client if we wanted to present this to the customer. This out-of-the-box catalog sort of assumes by default that you may not be interested in presenting all these technical details to the customer without any sort of assistance there. So this keeps it pretty simple. So it asks, does this affect multiple users? No, it's just me. Does it prevent you from doing your work? Yes. And what this does is it does some very basic priority manipulation. So obviously we don't want to present to the customer is it priority 1 through 5, with 1 being the highest, 5 being the lowest, because of course, with a customer, it's their problem. It'll always be a 1. So they can go ahead and enter their description. My printer is broken. And they have a little pop out here. They can just kind of do that. If they wanted to get a bigger view of it, and it's a little rich text editor there. But once they submit it, the beauty of the service catalog is that because they're going through the self-service portal, they're using, we get a little confirmation there, that ticket is coming to you in the technician client already categorized. So I'm going to get out of this ticket. And when I go back to my list of tickets here, let's go into this. I'm going to view in grid. All right, so a couple things happened here, right? So this is the very ticket that I submitted. It got a 2 priority because I said it's stopping me from working, so it bumped up the priority. This is configurable, of course. The short description is desktop. That just picked it from the category. I've got my description, but you can see this is already classified. Now, if we did display the specifics form to the customer in the portal, this would all be filled out, or filled out to the best of their ability. But you'll notice too that we've got our SLA. Everything is done for you. So that's sort of the beauty of sending the customer through the self-service portal and having them interact with the catalog that way. So this brief video, I just wanted to show you how the pre-implementation checklist interacts with the tool, and as a way of helping you kind of formulate how you want to develop your service catalog from that out-of-the-box default. So thanks for watching, and let us know if you have any questions.